This is Tsem Rinpoche's Paranormal Zone, and I've not done this before, but I'm going to do it now. And paranormal is kind of subjective to a lot of people. It means different things to different people. To me, paranormal is something that's not normal, whatever that word normal actually means. And it's something related to, and I want to talk about, banshees, Pontianaks, the Nazca lines in Peru, hauntings, ghost ships, sailing stones, UFOs, Bigfoot, werewolves, Mothman, chupacabras, Bermuda Triangle, Jersey Devil, Yetis, witches, poltergeists, and the whole thing and everything related and interrelated and everything that can be in between. I've always been interested in these subjects since I was a very small kid, and I remember always going down to the library and really getting books on these subjects. Of course, that time I didn't know it's called paranormal. And I would get books on also Dharma. And these two kind of books I would read up voraciously. I mean, I would like borrow, 10 to 15 books if I can, every 2-3 weeks, and from various libraries. So I would read up on them, and I would be very interested and very fascinated. And one of my favorite shows as a kid was hosted by Leonard Nimoy, and it was called In Search Of. And I still like that show. I have the DVD collection, so I watch it from time to time. I don't know really why I'm interested in these subjects. I don't really know. I don't have an explanation. I don't know where it comes from. But I know that a lot of these things kind of exist. Sometimes you don't have like a logical explanation. You don't have a logical, clear-cut proof that these things exist, or something is happening, or something is right. You kind of have a premonition. You just have a feeling. You just have a gut kind of sensation that it's real. And for me, UFOs and Bigfoots and Sasquatches and ghosts and poltergeists, they exist. Why not? Why is it that if we can't see something or we can't explain something with our limited capacity and limited research skills, that we can just write it off, that they don't exist? They exist. And I think for people think that you're rational or you're sane or you're for real, it doesn't really matter. In the end, if you have an interest in something, in the end, if you are fascinated by something, in the end, if you like something, it's about you and the subject that you like. So if you want to do research and you want to investigate and you want to learn more, you want to understand more, and you want to share more, then that's up to you. In some places, people think, well, if you're interested in UFOs and you're interested in, Bigfoot, that you shouldn't be taken seriously, or you're not for real, or it's kind of strange. Well, from my kind of background, from a Buddhist background, nothing is permanent, nothing is fixed, nothing is solid, and all types of beings can exist. And all types of beings that we call supernatural or not normal or paranormal do exist. And it mentions it explicitly in a lot of the old scriptures. So in Buddhism, all types of beings in other worlds, in other dimensions, in other universes, in other planets, in other realms, in other planes do definitely exist. And there's no big deal. I mean, if we have the capacity to look deeper into them and to research and find out about them, that's fine. And if we don't have the capacity, then that's also fine. So it's not like they exist or they don't exist, they do exist. But I'm not speaking from a religious or spiritual background. I'm talking about my personal interest. I mean, I like a lot of things. I have a varied and very broad interest. And some people call me the tech-savvy, modern, internet, East meets West, cool Lama or Rinpoche. And some people label me, wow, I'm not the normal, ordinary type of teacher that I really can, talk about many things. And I've heard people say that to me. But you know what? These are my interests. And these are things I like. So on my blog, I wanted to talk about some of these subjects. What's my point? What's my purpose? What's my goal? Well, there's no really big goal. There's no huge goal. It's just that I am interested in these things. And I know a lot of my blog friends, you know, I know a lot of you come on the blog religiously, if I can use that word, and read and learn up and check and examine and benefit. And I want to say hi to all my blog friends. And I'm so glad that my blog and the different categories and the different kind of information we have really benefits you. My blog is nothing except to share information for everyone to think deeper. It's not for you to do anything more, but to share information and for you to kind of learn, open up your mind. And I know a lot of my blog friends live in very far away, rural, and kind of distant places where information on the net or from my blog is kind of like opening a new world for them. Okay, so I wanted to include the paranormal on my blog, and I wanted to talk about these subjects, and I wanted to share about these subjects because I like them, and I know a lot of you guys out there really like them. Today is the first shoot of our paranormal sketch, and it's the first video. And there's a few of us out here. It's around 12 midnight, a little later. And I've got a few people here. I've got Molam, and I've got Sing Piao, and I've got Ethan, and I've got Brian. And Ethan can just relax now. And we're sitting here in a dark, lonely park, not miles and miles or kilometers away, but away from a lot of people. And all we hear is insects, and there's a moon right above us. And we're under the street lamp, and behind us is kind of well, it can be spooky to some people. So we're here filming our first, and this is kind of my introduction and why I'm doing this. And let me reiterate, it's just an interest. It's just something I like. It's just some subjects that I like. I'm not trying to condone the subjects. I'm not trying to tell you that you have to believe that they exist or you have to do something. I'm not telling you they don't exist. I am just simply investigating in my own little small way, on my own little free time, these paranormal kind of subjects that's always interested me. We're going to be taping people who have had experiences and talk about it, and maybe even go on location of some places that are kind of haunted. But it's all in the works, it's all in the making, and we're going to progress as we go along, we're going to learn as we go along, and we're going to improve as we go along. When I was a kid, my mother was my stepmother. My stepmother, I'm just going to call her my mother for easy sake, was born in Belgrade, Yugoslavia, and it was around World War II. She is a Kalmyk, which is one of the nationalities of Mongolian people. And during World War I, the Kalmyk people from wherever they were living, which was near the Black Sea in Western Russia, there is a republic there called Kalmykia, or Kalmyk, and it's still there, and they are a republic. They were living there, and during World War I, because of the war and because of the food and scarcity, a whole bunch of them, thousands of them, had moved to Europe. Some to Eastern Europe, some to Western Europe. My step-parents, or my mother's family, had moved to Yugoslavia. So there was a huge population of Kalmyks, or Mongolians, I'm just going to refer to them as Kalmyks, living in Yugoslavia. And my mother was born in Belgrade, so she speaks Russian, Yugoslavian, Kalmyk, and when she immigrated to the States many years later, she learned also English. So my mom, her name is Dana, by the way, Dana Bogayev, was a very warm, giving, kind, and extremely generous person. And she just had a really warm heart, and she had a generous character and a generous nature. But she also had schizophrenia, which wasn't diagnosed till around 30 years later, which made her and the people she loved unintended suffer a lot. And but I don't really think about those things. I think about who she really is when her schizophrenia was not around. And there were many evenings where I would go downstairs, and she'd like to drink a type of herbal tea that we'd put in cherry preserves in and some honey. And she'd like to eat a certain snack, and I'd make the snack for her, and I'd make the drinks for her, and I'd go upstairs to her room. I mean, my father was out somewhere, and it would just be me and her in the house, and I'd go up to her room, and I like going up to her room, especially in the summers, because she was the only room in the house that had air conditioning. So she'd turn on the air conditioning, it'd be super cool, it'd be super comfortable And I would sit in the air-conditioned room on the floor. She'd be on the bed with the lights up, lights on, and the pillows propped. And she'd be on her prop pillow, not well. Sometimes she'd be sick. And with the lights on, and we'd read comic books together. She learned English by reading comic books. So she read a lot of comic books. And we'd go together to 7-Eleven or one of these kind of places that sold comic books in Howell. And she's very generous, and I just buy like 10 or 12 comic books. She'd buy her comic books. And we'd go to a room, and we'd clean, and we'd cook, and then we'd settle into a room, and I'd be on the floor, and then she'd be in bed, and then we'd read comic books together. And sometimes it was really a treat. It was really a delight. Because she'd be in a really good mood, and she'd be really happy, and she'd tell me stories about her childhood. And she'd tell me stories about the way she was brought up, and she'd tell me stories about her family and what happened, and the war, and how they immigrated, and the sufferings and the problems she went through. And you know, she wasn't telling me to look good. She wasn't telling me to show off. I mean, I'm a son. There's nothing to show off to. She wasn't telling me to just blabbering. She was actually sharing her life and what she was doing and what happened to her. And during those talks, she gave me a lot of supernatural, paranormal stories. At that time, I didn't think much, except, yeah, if mom says it happens, because my mom doesn't lie. You know, my mom, oh, well, everybody lies, little white lies. But, you know, my mom doesn't lie. And she's a very honest woman, and she's a great person. So when she told me, that's, you know, I just believed her. And she has the third eye, what we commonly refer to as people who can see supernatural beings. And so her house was in the middle of the war-torn area, World War II in Belgrade, Yugoslavia. And she told me that, well, she has, let me see, 2 sisters, and she has 2 brothers. And then herself, that's 5 of them. And she told me that, you know, bombs, there's shelling, there's a war going on, and they had to stay in their house. It was really literally dangerous. And there was a lot of Nazi soldiers, you know, not far away from encampments. And they weren't very vicious and cruel to my mother's family. It's because to the Nazis, they kind of looked Japanese, and I guess they were allied together. So what happened is my mother told me that when she'd leave the house, that there would be soldiers' corpses riddled all over their yard outside and in the roads, and that there were so many dead people that it was very difficult for the town or the council or the government to clean them up. I mean, you're in the middle of a war, literally in the middle of the war. So there would be like corpses all over the place and dead bodies all over the place. And she'd have to walk between these dead bodies. She'd have to walk past them. And I asked her, weren't you scared? And she'd be like, yeah, I was, you know, worried, but, you know, I had to go out. And I asked her, why did you go out? My mother was kind of the tomboy of the family. She was tough. She is all girl, all woman, but she's tough, and she's strong, and she's smart, and she's intelligent, and she's daring. So she used to sneak off from her house against her parents' orders to the army barracks to steal bread or other supplies that she can get her hands on. And she'd bring it home. She'd bring it home and give it to her mother, and her mother would scold her and say, hey, where'd you get this from? Where'd you go? And she says, look, the family's hungry, and I went and I stole food. And the mother, of course, appreciated her daughter's daringness and really, you know, hard work and care and risk, but she was also very worried about her daughter. And my mother told me she would do this quite often. She would go and sometimes steal sausages or whatever and bring it back home because they were really in shortage of food, not just them, everybody in that area. So she told me that she'd go out nightly to steal food, and luckily she was never caught because she was small, she was petite, and she was quick and she was fast. Can you imagine in the middle of the night, a young Kalmyk girl in war-torn Belgrade, Yugoslavia, sneaking off from her home and sneaking into army barracks to get food for her family? Well, I believe it because my mom's like that. You know, my stepmom really, really is that type of person. And so she told me on one of these nights, she had gone out, and when she was on one of these roads, she came across a strange person. And my mother used to speak to me mostly in Mongolian, a little bit in English. So she would speak Kalmyk or Mongolian to me. My Mongolian is pretty shot these days. You know, I haven't spoken in 20, 30 years, so I've forgotten it. But, she used to speak to me in Kalmyk or Mongolian and tell me these stories. And she'd say, you know, she met a strange man. And this strange man was tall and very dark. And she couldn't really see his features. He didn't speak, but he stood there and just stared at her. And she said that she was scared because she's told me specifically that his eyes were not round or like pupils, but they were on fire. That he had fire or flames inside his eyeballs, where the eyeballs should be. So there is no eyeballs, there's just these fires inside. And she said that she was really like, wow, what's going on? And she was scared, but not scared to the point of running, because she was curious. Then he didn't do anything to her, he didn't come near her, but he just stared at her. And you know, this is in the dark on the road by herself. He didn't talk, they didn't communicate. She went home, she told her mother, and her mother was very worried and very concerned. So what happened was, they invited their Kalmyk priests, who are Tibetan Buddhists, and the priest came and he explained what had happened to her. So they were very worried, and the adults talked. So the next thing they knew was they had arranged a special ceremony. And they had laid her down, and she was like stripped. Of course, not completely, but she was kind of stripped. And the priest was there, and her mother and I guess her siblings were there. And the priest did prayers, and he blessed some water, and he has some scriptures, and he had written some sacred scriptures, Buddhist scriptures, on her body. And I said, what do you mean? With ink? She says, no, with the sacred water. So I said, so what happens? He writes it on and you can see it? She says, no, you can't see it at all. It's just water. So he wrote sacred mantras and sacred prayers on her body, back and front, and then did some prayers, and that was it. And I said, wow. So I said, could you wash? She goes, yeah, I can wash. Everything's normal. So she told me then she went on her sojourns, you know, her little food finding trips. And later on, she came across this being or this person again. And my mother said that this time she really wanted to see who he was and what he was and what he's going to do. So same thing, he was tall, he was black, and he had no features, and he stood very still, but his eyes were fired. So this time he didn't walk towards her. My mom told me that she walked towards him. And I asked her why. Because if it was anybody else, they'd just run. She said because she wanted to see who he was, what he was. And he didn't talk, he just looked at her. So she told me that when she went closer to him, this time, he backed off. So she'd walk a few steps, he'd walk a few steps back. And she told me that she felt a sensation of like light. She felt a sensation of luminosity coming out from her body. And she told me that she didn't see the light or the luminosity, but she felt a sensation of lights and luminosity emanating from her body. And it was kind of glowing. And she felt that she was glowing, and she felt that she was lighted up, for lack of a better word. And she said she's never had that happen before. And she said that that thing or that being must have seen her and seen the luminosity and kind of backed off. And so she told me that the prayer and the mantras were very effective because it protected her and it guarded her body and it guarded her being from harmful agents or supernatural agents. So she told me that it was different this time when she encountered him, that he actually backed away and she felt luminosity. So I found that story really interesting because it wasn't someone else's story. It was from my own mom, and it happened to her. And she's always telling me strange stories like that. You know, she has a light kind of clairvoyance, and she does have a third eye. So when she told me that story, I was very, very fascinated. She's told me other stories we can talk about another time, and I was enthralled. And I think that kind of opened up the karma for me to be interested in horror movies and, you know, not so much slasher movies, but horror or supernatural based movies and supernatural things. But I've always had the interest. I mean, you know, they can't open up in you what's not in you. She would sometimes wake up and tell me, oh, I had a dream and I saw 2 rings and something blue, a blue shirt. And I said, what does that mean? She says, oh, that person who we know just got pregnant and they're gonna have a boy. And I'm like, how do you know that? And she says, because I had a dream that this couple has rings and they have a blue shirt, a small blue shirt. Blue represents boy. And sure enough, a few months later, you know, we find out that this couple is pregnant and later on they did have a boy. I mean, I've seen her say things to me like that out of the blue. And you have to understand, she doesn't sit me down on a table with a Ouija board with candles on and it's all mystical and then she does a prediction and she gets out the tarot cards. It's nothing like that. It's just that, you know, we're cleaning up in a room or we're clearing things out, we're walking around in the house and she just arbitrarily blurts it out and says, hey, I had a dream and there was this blue shirt and this couple, and she'll give me the names also of the people. They're gonna have a boy. And I'm like, oh. I mean, I didn't doubt her. I just thought, wow, that's pretty incredible. So I would hear stories like that from my mom since I was very young. So I guess this is our first paranormal story that I told you about the black being with the red eye. And that came from my mother, and I wanted to share that. And I kind of want to dedicate this first paranormal talk in introduction to my mom, Dana Bugayev, who has passed away and whom I love very, very much. No matter what we went through together, no matter what difficulties, and we had very difficult times. I mean, times were so difficult that I couldn't live with her and I had to leave her. But, you know, you can see deep inside a person, no matter how difficult they are, what kind of person they were. And she was a great person, and she was a kind person. She taught me generosity. She taught me helping people, and she taught me helping the poor and giving food to people who are hungry, because she used to do that, and I watched her do it, and I learned a lot from her. So I wanted to dedicate this first one to my mom, Dana Bugayev, and may she have a good rebirth again and again, and may she be all right. So that's kind of why I want to do this. I kind of shared with everyone in the world and why I'm interested. Welcome to Tsem Rinpoche's Paranormal Blog. We have an office, a nice office done up really well by Dato Ruby, right behind Kichara Gompa, and Gompa is the prayer hall. And we're going to do work there. We're going to go on location and we're going to meet people, we're going to talk, we're going to have our own paranormal stories as accurate and as real as possible. Do join me in the future, and I wish everybody well. Thank you. Good night.